Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Goodspeed, right here. President Biden had one accomplishment last year, and that was the approximately 300 new regulations his administration issued on businesses and workers. The cost of these regulations total about $201 billion. That's their cost, by the way, that they said they had. This is 3 times the regulatory costs imposed by the Obama administration and 40 times the cost imposed by President Trump in their first year in office, respectively. My question, I guess, begins with how do these regulatory burdens impact inflation and the price of goods, their businesses' ability to hire workers, and their ability to have more resources to actually focus on their businesses?
Well, thank you, Congressman. These regulatory changes, at the end of the day, increase costs. They increase compliance costs. Compliance costs incur opportunity costs because workers working on compliance aren't working on other more productive activities. There's also a deadweight loss from insofar as it prevents transactions that would otherwise have occurred. And there are also spillovers into unregulated industries. And I would just add that over the long run, an increased regulatory burden tends to decrease the flow of new firms into the market and decrease the exit of incumbent firms, so it lowers competition. So insofar as one's hypothesis is that insufficient competition was a cause for the inflation that we've observed, the regulatory burdens that we've seen increase in the past year likely exacerbated rather than attenuated that.
So you just sort of made the case that I know the other side constantly talks about them doing things when you're concerned about the low and middle income folks, and yet they continue to produce legislation, more rules that do the very thing that they're talking about they want to try and minimize. As you just indicated, the hammer comes down on the low and moderate income end of the spectrum with inflation, with all sorts of rules, costs of rules and regulations. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
I also am the ranking member on small business, and we had economists come into our for a briefing the other day, and I asked him to break down inflation. And I said, basically, I think it's composed of excess money supply, rules and regulations, energy costs, and the supply chain / jobs problem. Would you agree that's kind of the four main drivers of our inflation we have today?
I would agree with that.
I asked him to break it down percentage-wise, and he said about 40% money supply, 20% regs, 20% energy, and 20% supply chain. Would that be in the ballpark, do you think? Or one of them a little bit low, one of them a bit high? What would you estimate?
I would lower the estimated probability for supply chains, and I would substitute for the regulatory costs. I would just say, generally speaking, it's excess demand relative to supply.
Okay. So, again, I sat down and we had the chairman of the Federal Reserve in here, Chairman Powell, last week. And I read this off to him, and he was talking about being able to manipulate the economy through interest rates and all sort of stuff. And I told him, I said, unless you're going to go with 10%, these type of costs, if you look at them, where do you in this group have that much influence? And so if you look at supply chain, look at energy production regulations, almost all of those are under the direct ability of the administration to impact those, is it not? Would you not say that?
It is.
And a lot of it is, quite frankly, without Congress even being able to intervene. I mean, the president, first week in office, first thing he did was close down the pipeline. I mean, he can open that back up. There we go. That fixes that 20%. Supply chain, he can help with some of the threats of taxation. He can help the people get back into the workforce. Rules and regulations, that's obviously falling all on him and his administration. And so then you come to money supply, and you look at, I'm guessing at 50-50, the Fed with the way they manipulated and 50%, but us, the Congress those guys putting more money into the system. So it would look to me like the Fed will only have like 2.5% out of the 7.5%. At most, the administration can fix this thing, and to me, it all lies at their feet. Would that be a fair analogy?
I think that's a fair analogy. I would add that the two sectors over which the Fed has most control with respect to inflation is housing and auto prices, and we've seen some big increases there in the past year.
Very good. Just a quick question for you: inflation going to go away, and do you think we have a recession coming shortly?
When I look at the underlying inflation measures, when I look at the change in inflation expectations, I think that this is going to be very persistent, and it's going to take some very aggressive action on the part of the Fed and hopefully Congress. And that's disconcerting because that could mean some economic pain.
Thank you very much, Doctor.